The dust from Decker Crawford's boots hadn't even settled on his front porch when he heard the sharp crack of a woman's voice carrying across his ranch like a whip snap. And what he saw next made him question whether 6 months in the Montana Territory had finally driven him out of his mind. A woman in a split riding skirt and worn leather vest stood in the center of his corral with his 12 roughest cowboys lined up like schoolboys, and not a single one of them looked inclined to argue with whatever she was saying. Decker had left Old Tucson, Arizona in February of 1882, tasked with delivering a massive cattle herd north through some of the most unforgiving territory in the West. The journey had been brutal, filled with river crossings that claimed 2 good horses, a stampede that scattered half the herd across 3 counties, and a late blizzard that nearly froze him solid. He had left his foreman, old Pete Garrison, in charge of the Crawford ranch with strict instructions to keep things running smooth until his return. Now it was August. The Arizona sun was beating down like a hammer on an anvil, and there was a strange woman on his property giving orders like she owned the place. He dismounted slowly, his muscles protesting after 8 straight days in the saddle. His horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Copper, huffed and shook his mane, equally exhausted. Decker tied the reins to the hitching post and took a moment to really observe what was happening in his corral. The woman was maybe 25, with auburn hair pulled back in a thick braid that hung down to the middle of her back. Her face was sun-browned and freckled, with high cheekbones and a determined set to her jaw that suggested she didn't take nonsense from anyone. She was currently pointing at a section of fence that had clearly been repaired recently, her voice carrying clearly across the yard. "I told you yesterday that post needed to be set deeper, Miguel. This is cattle country, not some gentleman's riding stable. When a bull decides he wants to be somewhere else, that fence needs to hold or we lose livestock, money, and possibly someone's life. Do it again, and do it right this time." The cowboy she addressed, a stocky Mexican man Decker recognized as Miguel Cortez, nodded without a trace of resentment. "Yes, Miss Rosalie, I will fix it proper this afternoon." "Good. And the rest of you, I want the water troughs in the south pasture cleaned and refilled before noon. It is hot enough to cook eggs on the rocks out there, and I will not have cattle suffering because you decided to cut corners. Jimmy, you and Frank take the wagon and bring back those supplies from town. I have the list ready. The rest of you know your assignments. Get to it." The cowboys dispersed with a speed and efficiency that Decker had rarely achieved even on his best days. They moved with purpose. No grumbling, no sideways glances, just pure focused work. It was impressive and more than a little irritating. Decker started walking toward the corral, his spurs jingling with each step. The woman turned at the sound, and for a brief moment, surprise flickered across her face before it was replaced by a cool, evaluating look. She had green eyes, he noted, the color of new grass after spring rain, and they were currently taking his measure like she was deciding whether he was worth her time. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone polite but not particularly warm. "Well, I would hope so, seeing as this is my ranch," Decker replied, keeping his voice level despite the irritation simmering in his gut. "Name is Decker Crawford. I own this land, those cattle, and those cowboys you have been ordering around. Who the hell are you, and where is Pete Garrison?" Something shifted in her expression, a flash of pain quickly masked. She walked toward him, stopping a few feet away and meeting his gaze directly. "My name is Rosalie Morgan. Pete Garrison was my uncle. He died 3 months ago." The words hit Decker like a fist to the chest. Pete had been 62 years old, tough as old leather and one of the best men Decker had ever known. "How?" Hart gave out. He was moving cattle in the heat, pushed himself too hard. By the time we got him back to the house, it was too late. Rosalie's voice remained steady, but Decker could hear the grief underneath it. He died in his bed that night. We buried him on the hill overlooking the east pasture, where he always said he wanted to be if his time came. Decker removed his hat and ran a hand through his sweat-dampened dark hair. Pete had been his father's best friend, had stayed on after the elder Crawford passed 5 years ago, and had become something like family. The news settled heavy in Decker's chest, mixing with exhaustion and the disorientation of coming home to find everything changed. "I am sorry for your loss," he said quietly. "Pete was a good man, but that still does not explain why you are here running my ranch." Rosalie crossed her arms, and he noticed the calluses on her hands, the lean muscle in her forearms. This was not some city woman playing at ranch life. "After Uncle Pete died, your cowboys were ready to scatter. No foreman, no one giving orders, cattle that needed tending and accounts that needed managing. I had nowhere else to go, so I stepped in. I have been working ranches since I was 12 years old. I know cattle, horses, and how to manage men who think they know better than me. Your ranch has turned a profit for the last 3 months. The livestock is healthy, and not a single cowboy has quit. You are welcome to check the books. They are in the house, along with all the correspondence I have handled in your absence." Decker studied her for a long moment. There was no apology in her stance, no deference. She had done what needed doing, and she was not going to act ashamed of it. Part of him wanted to be angry at the presumption, at coming home to find his world rearranged by a stranger. But another part, the practical part that had kept him alive through cattle drives and hard winters, recognized competence when he saw it. "Show me the books," he said finally. They walked to the main house, a sturdy adobe structure with a covered porch that provided blessed shade. Inside, the house was cleaner than Decker had ever managed to keep it. The floor had been swept, the furniture dusted, and there was a faint smell of bread baking that made his stomach growl. He had been living on jerky and hardtack for the better part of a week. Rosalie led him to the desk in what passed for an office, a small room off the main living area. She pulled out a ledger and opened it, turning it so he could see the neat columns of figures. Income from cattle sales, expenses for supplies, wages paid to the cowboys, notes about which pastures had been rotated, which stock had been culled, even a record of a mare that had foaled in June. Decker sat down and went through it carefully, looking for errors or signs of mismanagement. He found none. In fact, she had negotiated a better price for a herd of steers than he had gotten the previous year, and she had managed to reduce supply costs by finding a new merchant in town who offered better rates. "You have been buying from Sullivan instead of Grant," he noted. "Grant was overcharging you by 15%. I confirmed the prices with 2 other ranches. Sullivan gives honest weight and fair prices. He also extends credit when needed, which Grant refused to do." Decker leaned back in the chair, which creaked under his weight. He was a big man, 6'3" with broad shoulders earned from years of hard labor, and he suddenly felt every mile he had traveled over the past 6 months. "You have done good work here, Miss Morgan. Better than good. I appreciate you stepping in when Pete passed. But now that I am home, I reckon we need to discuss what comes next." Rosalie's expression became carefully neutral. "I understand. I will pack my things and be out of your way by tomorrow." "Hold on now," Decker said, raising a hand. "I did not say you had to leave. In fact, I would be a fool to let you go. I need a new foreman, and it seems like you have already been doing the job. The question is whether you want to stay on." She blinked, clearly surprised. "You are offering me the foreman position. I am offering you a job as ranch manager." Same authority Pete had, same pay plus a percentage of profits if we have a good year. You have earned it." For the first time since he had arrived, Rosalie's composure cracked slightly. He saw hope flicker in her eyes, quickly followed by wariness. "Why? You do not know me. I could be robbing you blind for all you know. You could be, but you are not. I can read books well enough to spot that, and my cowboys would not follow you the way they do if you were not worthy of it. Men like Miguel and Frank have been with me for years. They are loyal, but they are not stupid. If you were not good at this, they would have found a way to contact me or would have left." Rosalie was quiet for a moment, her gaze dropping to the ledger. When she looked back up, there was something vulnerable in her expression that had not been there before. "I will not lie to you, Mr. Crawford. I need this job. After Uncle Pete died, I had no money and nowhere to go. My father died when I was 14 and my mother passed 2 years ago. Pete was my only family. If you are offering me a place here, I will work harder than anyone you have ever employed. You will not regret it." Decker stood and extended his hand. "Then we have a deal, Miss Morgan. Welcome to the Crawford Ranch, officially this time." She took his hand, her grip firm and sure. Her palm was warm and rough with calluses, the hand of someone who knew real work. The handshake lasted perhaps a moment longer than strictly necessary, and Decker found himself noticing details he had not paid attention to before. The way afternoon light filtering through the window caught the red highlights in her hair, the small scar on her chin that looked like it might have come from a childhood fall, the way her eyes seemed to assess and understand everything they looked at. He released her hand and stepped back, suddenly aware of how small the office felt with both of them in it. "I am going to clean up and get some rest. We can discuss the details of how we will work together tomorrow. For now, keep doing what you have been doing. The ranch is clearly in good hands." "Thank you, Mr. Crawford. I will not let you down. Call me Decker. If we are going to be working together, we might as well not be so formal." A small smile tugged at the corner of her mouth, the first real smile he had seen from her. "Rosalie, then." He nodded and headed toward his bedroom, suddenly feeling the full weight of 6 months on the trail. But as he washed the dust off his face and arms in the basin, he could not stop thinking about the woman who had taken over his ranch and somehow made it run better than he ever had. The next few days fell into an unexpected rhythm. Decker had thought he would need to reassert his authority, to remind the Cowboys who was boss and take back control of his operation. Instead, he found himself learning from Rosalie. She had a gift for reading cattle, for knowing which animals were worth keeping and which should be sold before they became a problem. She had reorganized the way the Cowboys worked, pairing experienced hands with newer ones in a way that improved efficiency without bruising egos. She had even established a rotating schedule for town runs that ensured supplies never ran low, and that the men got regular breaks from the isolation of ranch life. Decker spent his mornings riding with her, checking fences and water sources, discussing plans for the coming months. She was easy to talk to once she relaxed enough to speak freely. She had a sharp sense of humor that caught him off guard, and she was not afraid to tell him when she thought he was wrong about something. It was refreshing after years of employees who either agreed with everything he said or grumbled behind his back. One morning, about a week after his return, they were riding along the northern boundary when they came across a section of fence that had been deliberately cut. Decker dismounted to examine it, anger rising in his chest. This was not an accident. Someone wanted cattle to get through here. Rosalie knelt beside him, running her fingers over the clean cuts in the wire. "This is the 3rd time in the past 2 months, always the north fence, always at night. I have had the Cowboys take turns watching, but whoever is doing this knows how to move quiet. Why did you not mention this before? I did not want to dump every problem on your plate the moment you got home. I was planning to bring it up once you were settled." She stood, brushing dust from her split skirt. "I think it is probably rustlers from across the border. They cut the fence, drive off 10 or 15 head, and disappear before anyone notices." Decker swore under his breath. Rustling was a hanging offense in Arizona territory, but catching the thieves was easier said than done. "We need to set up a proper watch. I will talk to the men tonight, see if we can establish a schedule that covers the vulnerable areas. I already have one worked out. I just needed your approval to implement it and to hire 2 more hands to make it feasible." He looked at her, and she met his gaze calmly. It struck him again how competent she was, how she seemed to be 3 steps ahead of every problem. It also struck him how pretty she looked with the morning sun turning her hair to burnished copper and her eyes bright with focus. He pushed that thought away firmly. She worked for him, and mixing business with personal feelings was a recipe for disaster. "Show me the schedule when we get back. If it looks good, we will start tonight." They continued their ride in companionable silence, but Decker found his mind wandering. He had been so focused on the ranch, on getting home and reclaiming his life, that he had not thought much about what that life actually looked like. He was 32 years old, owned a successful ranch, and spent most of his time alone or in the company of cowhands who were employees, not friends. His father had always assumed Decker would marry, have children, build something lasting. But Decker had been too busy working, too focused on surviving and thriving in a harsh land, to think much about romance. Now, riding beside Rosalie with the Arizona sun beating down and the smell of sage and dust in the air, he found himself thinking about it quite a bit. That night after dinner, Decker called a meeting with all the cowboys. They gathered in the bunkhouse, a long building with rows of beds and a pot-bellied stove that would be essential come winter. Rosalie stood beside Decker as he explained the situation with the rustlers and laid out the new watch schedule she had devised. "This is going to mean longer hours for everyone, at least until we catch whoever is doing this or convince them we are not an easy target," Decker said. "But I will make it worth your while. Anyone who pulls night watch gets an extra $1 a week, and if we catch the rustlers, there is a $50 bonus to split among the crew." That got their attention. $50 was serious money, enough to make the extra work worthwhile. The men agreed without complaint, and Decker felt a surge of pride in his crew. They were good men, loyal and hardworking, and they deserved a boss who appreciated that. After the meeting, as the cowboys settled in for the night, Rosalie stopped Decker outside the bunkhouse. The sky was enormous above them, scattered with stars so bright they looked like holes punched in a black canvas. The air had cooled with the setting sun, bringing relief from the day's brutal heat. "You handled that well," she said. "The bonus was a smart touch. It gives them a stake in the outcome. I learned that from my father. People work harder when they feel like they are part of something, not just hired hands. Your father sounds like he was a wise man. He was. Tough but fair. He built this ranch from nothing, fought off drought and debt, and more than a few men who thought they could take what he had worked for." Decker looked out at the dark shapes of the buildings, the corrals, the land stretching away into darkness. "Sometimes I wonder if I am living up to what he built. From what I have seen, you are doing just fine." He glanced at her, surprised by the warmth in her voice. "Even though you had to step in and fix things while I was gone. You left the ranch in good hands with Pete, and you made a hard journey to expand your business. That takes courage and planning. What happened with Pete was not your fault. It was not anyone's fault. Sometimes life just takes people before we are ready to let them go." There was pain in her voice when she said that, the grief of losing the last of her family. Without thinking, Decker reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder. "I am glad you were here when it happened. Pete should not have died alone, and I am grateful he had family with him." Rosalie looked up at him, and in the starlight, her eyes seemed to hold entire worlds. "Thank you for saying that. It helps." They stood there for a moment, close enough that Decker could smell the faint scent of lavender soap and horse and leather that seemed to cling to her. Then she stepped back, breaking the connection, and he let his hand fall to his side. "I should get some rest," she said. "Tomorrow is going to be another long day." "Rosalie, where have you been sleeping? I just realized I never asked." "There is a small room off the kitchen." "It was a storage room, but I cleaned it out and moved a bed in there. It is small, but it suits me fine." "That is not right. You should have a proper room. There are 2 spare bedrooms upstairs. Take one of those." She hesitated. "Are you sure? I do not want to impose." "You have been running my ranch for 3 months. Taking a bedroom is not an imposition. Move your things tomorrow." "All right. Thank you, Decker." She walked back toward the house, and he watched her go, admiring the confident way she moved the set of her shoulders. Then he shook his head and headed to the barn to check on Copper and the other horses before bed. He needed to stop noticing things like how Rosalie moved or how she smelled. She was his employee, his ranch manager, and he needed to keep things professional. But as he lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling and listening to the sounds of the ranch settling in for the night, he could not quite manage to stop thinking about her. The weeks that followed were busy but productive. The night watches deterred the rustlers, or at least drove them to easier targets. No more fences were cut, and no more cattle went missing. Decker and Rosalie fell into an easy partnership, dividing responsibilities in a way that played to their respective strengths. He handled the business side, negotiating sales and managing relationships with buyers in Tucson and beyond. She managed the day-to-day operations, keeping the Cowboys productive and the ranch running smoothly. They also spent more time together, not just working but talking. In the evenings, after the day's work was done, they would sit on the porch and watch the sun set behind the distant mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple and red. Rosalie told him about growing up on a small ranch in New Mexico, about learning to ride before she could properly walk, about her father who had taught her everything he knew about cattle before a horse accident took his life. Decker shared his own stories, about traveling north with his father as a boy, about learning the hard way that the land did not care about your plans or your pride, about the loneliness of running a ranch that demanded everything and gave back just enough to make you keep trying. One evening in late September, as the brutal heat of summer finally began to break, Rosalie asked him something that had clearly been on her mind for a while. "Why did you never marry? Most men your age have wives and children by now." Decker took a sip of the coffee he had been nursing and considered the question. "I suppose I never found anyone who wanted the life I could offer. Ranching is hard, especially for women. Long hours, isolation, uncertainty. Most women I met wanted something more settled, more secure. And I never wanted someone who would resent the ranch or feel trapped by it. That is a lonely way to live. I know, but it is honest. I would rather be alone than with someone who wishes they were somewhere else." He paused, then added, "What about you? You are young, capable, pretty. Why are you not married?" Rosalie laughed, a slightly bitter sound. "Pretty does not count for much when you are a woman who works like a man. Most men I met wanted someone soft and domestic, someone who would stay home and have babies and not have opinions about how things should be done. I tried that once, playing the role men seem to want. It did not take. You were engaged, briefly. To a man in Santa Fe who said he loved me. Then he met my family, saw how I was with the horses and cattle, and decided I was too wild, too unladylike. He married a banker's daughter 6 months later. She said it lightly, but Decker could hear the old hurt underneath. Then he was a fool, Decker said quietly. Any man who cannot see your worth is not worth your time. Rosalie turned to look at him, her expression unreadable in the fading light. That is kind of you to say. It is not kindness. It is truth. Something shifted between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of feelings neither of them had been willing to name. The air felt charged, full of possibility and danger in equal measure. Decker wanted to reach for her, to close the distance between them and see if her lips were as soft as they looked. But he held himself back, aware that once he crossed that line, everything would change. Rosalie stood abruptly, as if she too felt the pull and was afraid of it. I should check on the horses. I think one of the mares might be coming up lame. Rosalie, wait. She paused, her back to him. Decker stood and walked over to her, his heart beating harder than it should. When he was close enough to touch her, he said, I need to know something. Do you feel it too, this thing between us? She turned slowly, and even in the dim light he could see the conflict in her eyes. Yes, but that does not mean we should act on it. I work for you, Decker. If things went wrong, I would lose everything. This job, this place, it is all I have. And if I promised you that would not happen, that no matter what, you would always have a place here, you cannot promise that. No one can. People say things they mean in the moment, but feelings change, situations change. She took a breath, steadying herself. I care about you. More than I should, but I cannot risk everything on something that might not last. It was the most honest thing anyone had ever said to him, and it hurt precisely because it was true. He had no guarantees to offer, no way to promise that whatever was growing between them would survive the challenges of real life. All he had was the truth of what he felt. I understand, he said finally, and I respect your position. But Rosalie, I want you to know that what I feel for you is not going to just disappear. I will wait. However long it takes, I will wait until you feel safe enough to take the chance. She looked at him for a long moment, and he saw her eyes glisten with unshed tears. Then she nodded once and walked away toward the barn, leaving him alone on the porch with the weight of unspoken words hanging heavy in the air. October brought cooler weather, and the start of preparing for winter. Cattle needed to be moved to lower pastures, supplies stockpiled, repairs made to buildings before the cold set in. Decker threw himself into the work, trying not to think about Rosalie and failing miserably. She was everywhere, in every conversation with the Cowboys, in the ledgers he reviewed, in the meals they shared, in the increasingly uncomfortable silence of the main house. They were polite to each other, professional, but the easy companionship they had built over the past months was gone, replaced by a careful distance that made Decker's chest ache. He had handled it badly, pushed too hard too fast, and now he was paying the price. It was Miguel who finally called him out on it. They were mending a water trough one afternoon when the older cowboy stopped working and fixed Decker with a knowing look. Boss, you need to fix whatever is broken between you and Miss Rosalie. Decker looked up, surprised. I do not know what you are talking about. Yes, you do. You are both miserable, tiptoeing around each other like the floor might break. The men have noticed. It is affecting everyone. This is none of your business, Miguel. Maybe not. But Miss Rosalie, she is a good woman. The best boss I have worked for besides your father. And you are a good man, even if you are being stubborn about this. Whatever happened between you, fix it. Apologize, talk to her, do whatever it takes. Life is too short to waste on pride. Miguel went back to work, leaving Decker to sit with those words. The man was right, and Decker knew it. He had let his hurt feelings and fear of rejection create a rift, and it was poisoning everything. He needed to make it right, even if that meant accepting that Rosalie might never want more than a professional relationship. That evening, he found her in the barn, checking on a colt that had been born earlier in the week. She was talking softly to the foal, her voice gentle as she ran her hands over its legs, checking for any signs of injury or weakness. The mare watched her tolerantly, clearly comfortable with Rosalie's presence. "He looks healthy," Decker said from the entrance. Rosalie did not look up. "He is strong. Should make a fine horse in a few years if we train him right." Decker walked closer, stopping at a respectful distance. "Rosalie, I need to apologize. I put you in an unfair position a few weeks ago. I should not have said what I said, should not have made things uncomfortable. You have every right to keep our relationship strictly professional, and I will respect that. But I miss talking to you. I miss having you as a friend. Can we find our way back to that, at least?" She straightened, finally meeting his eyes. "You do not need to apologize. You were honest about your feelings, and I appreciate that, even if I cannot act on them right now. But you are right that we need to find a way forward. I miss talking to you too." Relief flooded through him. "So we are good. We are good." She smiled, and it was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. "Friends, friends," he agreed. Even though the word felt inadequate for what he actually felt, they shook hands, formal and slightly awkward, and then Rosalie laughed. "This is ridiculous. Come here." She pulled him into a brief hug, and Decker allowed himself a moment to hold her, to feel the warmth of her against him before he stepped back. It was not everything he wanted, but it was enough for now. The weeks leading up to Christmas were busy and productive. The ranch was in good shape for winter, and Decker finalized several sales that would provide solid income through the lean months. He and Rosalie were back to their easy partnership, though there was an undercurrent of tension that never quite disappeared. He caught her watching him sometimes, when she thought he was not looking, and he wondered if she was struggling with the same feelings he was. In mid-December, Decker rode into Old Tucson to pick up supplies and mail. The town was decorated for the holidays, wreaths on doors and garlands strung across the main street. It was festive in a rough frontier sort of way, and it made him think about the fact that this would be the first Christmas he would not spend essentially alone. Rosalie would be there, and that changed everything. He was coming out of the general store with a box of supplies when he ran into James Sullivan, the merchant Rosalie had started buying from. Sullivan was a tall, thin man with sharp eyes and an honest reputation. "Crawford, good to see you. I wanted to thank you for the business your manager has been bringing my way. Miss Morgan is a shrewd negotiator." "She is that," Decker agreed. "She has been good for the ranch. I hear you are keeping her on permanent. Smart move. Women like her are rare. My wife has been singing her praises ever since Miss Morgan helped deliver our youngest when the doctor was not available. Said she was calm and capable, knew exactly what to do." Decker had not known about that. Rosalie had never mentioned it. "When was this?" "Back in July, right in the middle of the worst heat. Susan went into labor early and Miss Morgan happened to be in town. She stayed for 12 hours, helping with everything. Probably saved my wife's life if I am being honest. The baby was breech, and Miss Morgan knew how to turn him. Doctor said later that if she had not been there, we might have lost both of them." Something warm and fierce bloomed in Decker's chest. Of course Rosalie had helped. That was who she was. Someone who stepped up when needed, who had the skills and courage to do what needed doing. "I am glad she was there, and I am glad your wife and son are doing well. Doing great. Speaking of which, you should bring Miss Morgan to the Christmas social next week. Susan has been wanting to thank her properly, and it would do you both good to get off that ranch and socialize a bit." Decker promised to ask her, though he suspected Rosalie would not be enthusiastic about a social gathering. She seemed to prefer the company of horses and cattle to people. He was right. When he mentioned it that evening over dinner, she shook her head immediately. "I do not do well at those things. Too much small talk and people asking questions I do not want to answer." "What kind of questions?" "The usual. Why am I not married? Why do I dress like a man? Do I really run your ranch, or are the men just being polite? It gets tiresome." "What if I promise to stay by your side the whole time and deflect any questions you do not want to answer?" She looked at him skeptically. "Why does this matter to you?" "Because James Sullivan told me what you did for his wife. That was a good thing, Rosalie. They want to thank you. And honestly, it would be nice to go somewhere together that is not the ranch, to do something normal for a change." She was quiet for a long moment, then sighed. "Fine. But if anyone asks me to dance with their son or nephew or whoever, you are running interference. Deal." The Christmas social was held in the town hall, a large wooden building that served as church, courthouse, and community center depending on the day. By the time Decker and Rosalie arrived, the place was already crowded with ranchers, merchants, miners, and their families. A small band was playing in the corner, and tables along the walls were loaded with food that people had brought to share. Rosalie had surprised him by wearing a dress, a simple green cotton thing that was probably 10 years out of fashion, but that suited her perfectly. She had left her hair down instead of in its usual braid, and it fell in soft waves around her shoulders. She looked beautiful and profoundly uncomfortable. "We do not have to stay long," Decker murmured as they entered. "Just make an appearance, let the Sullivans say thank you, and we can leave." "You are a good man, Decker Crawford," she said quietly. They found James and Susan Sullivan near the refreshment table. Susan was a petite woman with a warm smile and a baby on her hip. When she saw Rosalie, her face lit up. "Miss Morgan, I am so glad you came. I have been wanting to thank you properly for what you did. Dr. Hopkins said you saved our lives, mine and little Thomas here." Rosalie looked embarrassed but gracious. "You would have been fine. You are stronger than you think." "Maybe, but I am grateful nonetheless." "Please, help yourselves to food and drink. And save me a dance later, Mr. Crawford. My James has 2 left feet, and I would like to remember what it is like to dance with someone who knows how." The evening passed more pleasantly than Decker had expected. People were friendly without being intrusive, and several ranchers he knew from various business dealings stopped to talk shop. Rosalie stayed close to his side, occasionally contributing to conversations but mostly listening. He noticed people watching them, putting together their own conclusions about what the two of them were to each other, and he found he did not mind the speculation. Around 9 o'clock, the band struck up a waltz, and several couples moved to the open space that served as a dance floor. Decker turned to Rosalie, suddenly nervous in a way he had not been since he was a teenager. "Would you like to dance?" She hesitated. "I am not very good at it, neither am I, but we can stumble through it together." She smiled and took his offered hand. He led her to the floor and pulled her into the proper position, one hand at her waist, the other holding her hand. They started moving, and she was right. She was not a skilled dancer. But neither was he, and they managed to move in something approximating rhythm without stepping on each other's feet. "Thank you for bringing me tonight," Rosalie said quietly. "I needed this more than I realized." "What do you mean?" "Being off the ranch, being around people who are not employees or business contacts, remembering that there is more to life than work. It is easy to forget that when you are focused on surviving." "I know what you mean. I have spent the past 5 years doing nothing but working. It is only since you arrived that I have started thinking about what else life might hold." She looked up at him, and in the warm light of the lanterns, Her eyes were soft and full of something that made his heart beat faster. "What do you think it might hold?" "I think it might hold whatever we are brave enough to reach for." The song ended, and they stopped moving but did not immediately separate. Around them, other couples were leaving the floor or switching partners, but Decker and Rosalie stood still, caught in a moment that felt suspended outside of time. "I am afraid," she whispered, "of wanting something and losing it, of not being enough." "You are more than enough," Decker said with quiet intensity. "You are everything." Someone bumped into them, breaking the spell. They stepped apart and Rosalie looked flustered. "I need some air." She walked quickly toward the door and Decker followed, worried he had pushed too hard again. Outside, the night was cold and clear, the stars brilliant overhead. Rosalie stood on the edge of the porch, hugging herself against the chill. "I am sorry," Decker said. "I did not mean to make you uncomfortable." "You did not. That is the problem. When I am with you, everything feels right, feels possible. And that terrifies me because I know how quickly things can fall apart. My father died and left us with nothing. My mother worked herself to death trying to keep us afloat. Uncle Pete promised he would always be there, and then his heart gave out. Everyone I have loved, everyone I have counted on, they leave. And I do not know if I can survive it happening again." Decker moved to stand beside her, close but not touching. "I cannot promise I will never die, Rosalie. Nobody can. But I can promise that I will never choose to leave you. I can promise that whatever time we have, I will spend it loving you the best way I know how. And I can promise that you will always have a home at the Crawford ranch, whether we are together or not. I had papers drawn up last week, giving you part ownership in the ranch. If something happens to me, you will not be left with nothing." She turned to stare at him, shock written across her face. "You did what?" "I had my lawyer draw up documents making you a partner in the ranch. 20% ownership with the option to buy more if you want. You have earned it, Rosalie. You saved my ranch when Pete died. You made it better than I ever did. And you deserve security, a future that does not depend on someone else's whims." Tears were streaming down her face now, catching the light from inside the hall. "Why would you do that?" "Because I love you. And even if you never love me back, even if we only ever stay friends and business partners, I want you to have something that is yours, something no one can take away." Rosalie made a choked sound that was half laugh, half sob. Then she stepped forward and kissed him. It was desperate and sweet and tasted like salt from her tears, and Decker wrapped his arms around her and held on like she was the only solid thing in a spinning world. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Rosalie pressed her forehead to his chest. "I am still afraid. I know, so am I, but let us be afraid together." She looked up at him, and slowly a smile spread across her face. "Together, I like the sound of that." They rode home that night under a canopy of stars, sitting close on the wagon bench, her head on his shoulder and his arm around her waist. Neither of them said much, content just to be near each other. When they reached the ranch, Decker helped her down from the wagon and they stood in the yard, reluctant to let the night end. "I should take care of the horses," Decker said, not moving. "I should go inside," Rosalie replied, also not moving. He kissed her again, slower this time, savoring the feel of her in his arms. When they broke apart, he said, "Tomorrow we should probably talk about what this means, about how we move forward." "Tomorrow," she agreed. "Tonight let us just be happy." He watched her walk into the house, then took care of the horses with a grin on his face that probably made him look like a fool. He did not care. For the first time in longer than he could remember, he was genuinely, completely happy. The next morning they did talk. Over coffee at the kitchen table, they discussed how to navigate a romantic relationship while still maintaining the professional respect of the Cowboys. They decided to be honest about their relationship, but to keep public displays of affection to a minimum while working. They also agreed to continue splitting responsibilities the way they had been, with Rosalie managing day-to-day operations and Decker handling business and sales. "I do not want people to think I am with you for the wrong reasons," Rosalie said. "I need them to know I earned my place here. Anyone who has worked with you knows that already, but I understand what you are saying. We will be professional during work hours, and the partnership documents stand regardless of our personal relationship. You have earned your stake in this ranch." The Cowboys took the news of their relationship with good-natured ribbing and genuine happiness. Miguel declared that it was about time, and several of the other men admitted they had been betting on when Decker would finally make his move. The general consensus was that Rosalie was too good for him, but they supposed she knew what she was doing. Winter settled over the ranch, bringing cold nights and occasional snow. Decker had always found the winter months lonely, with shorter days and limited outdoor work. But this year was different. This year he had Rosalie. They spent evenings reading by the fire, playing cards, talking about plans for the spring. They cooked together, creating meals that were probably not very fancy, but that tasted better than anything Decker had ever eaten because they made them side by side. On New Year's Eve, with 1883 just hours away, Decker took Rosalie for a walk under the stars. They climbed the hill where Pete Garrison was buried, and Rosalie laid a small wreath on his grave. "He would have liked you," she said quietly. "He always said I needed to find someone who saw me for who I really was, not who they wanted me to be. I think you are that person. I think Pete would be proud of what you have done with the ranch. He was training you to take over, was he not?" She nodded. "He said I had the gift for it, that some people understand land and animals in a way that cannot be taught, only nurtured. He was teaching me everything he knew. Then we will honor his memory by continuing that work, by building something that lasts." They stood together in the cold, holding hands and watching their breath fog in the frigid air. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, lonely and wild. The sound seemed fitting for this land, for the life they were building together out here on the edge of civilization. "Marry me," Decker said suddenly. The words came out before he had consciously decided to say them, but once they were spoken, he knew they were right. Rosalie turned to look at him, her eyes wide. "What? Marry me? I know it is fast. I know we have only been together a few weeks, but I also know what I feel. I love you, Rosalie. I want to build a life with you, a real life. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to face whatever comes our way knowing we are in it together. So marry me, please." She was silent for so long that Decker started to panic, wondering if he had misread everything, if he had pushed too far too fast again. Then she started laughing, a joyful sound that echoed across the dark hills. "Yes, yes, you stubborn, wonderful man, I will marry you." He picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing like children. When he set her down, he kissed her thoroughly, pouring everything he felt into it. When they broke apart, both flushed and breathless despite the cold, Rosalie said, "We should probably go back before we freeze to death. It would be a shame to die of cold right after getting engaged." They walked back to the house hand in hand, making plans as they went. A small wedding, just the Cowboys and a few friends from town. No fuss, no big production, just a simple ceremony followed by a celebration. They would do it in the spring, when the weather was better and the ranch was not so demanding of their time. But spring seemed a long way off, and Decker was impatient. In mid-January, he convinced Rosalie to move up the timeline. They could have a simple ceremony now and a bigger celebration later if she wanted. All that mattered was making their commitment official, binding their lives together in a way that could not be undone. Rosalie agreed, and on a cold Sunday in late January, they gathered everyone together at the ranch. The circuit preacher happened to be passing through Old Tucson, and he agreed to come out and perform the ceremony. They stood in the main room of the house, with Miguel and the other cowboys as witnesses, and exchanged vows that were simple and heartfelt. "I promise to stand beside you in good times and bad, to work with you and support you, to love you for exactly who you are," Rosalie said, her voice steady even though Decker could see her hands shaking slightly. "I promise to cherish you every day, to listen when you talk, to trust your judgment and respect your strength," Decker replied. "I promise to build a life with you that is worth living, full of laughter and hard work and love." They exchanged simple gold bands that Decker had bought in town, and the preacher pronounced them husband and wife. When Decker kissed her, the cowboys cheered, and someone started playing a fiddle. They cleared the furniture from the main room and danced, ate the food the men had prepared, and celebrated until late into the night. Finally, when the last cowboy had stumbled back to the bunkhouse and the house was quiet, Decker carried Rosalie up the stairs to their bedroom. He set her down gently, suddenly nervous in a way he had not expected. This was new territory for both of them, a level of intimacy neither had experienced before. "We do not have to rush," he said quietly. "We have all the time in the world now." Rosalie smiled and reached up to cup his face in her hands. "I love you, Decker Crawford, and I am not afraid anymore." She kissed him, and Decker lost himself in the warmth and wonder of her, in the knowledge that she was his wife, his partner, his future. They moved together with a tenderness and passion that spoke of deep feeling, and when they finally lay tangled together in the darkness, Decker felt a peace he had never known before. "Are you happy?" he whispered into her hair. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she whispered back. "Thank you for waiting for me to be ready. Thank you for seeing me." "Always," he promised. "Always." The months that followed were a blend of hard work and deep happiness. Spring brought the usual challenges of calving season, fence repairs, and preparing for the summer heat. But Decker and Rosalie faced everything as a team, their partnership made stronger by their love. The ranch continued to prosper under their joint management, and word spread that the Crawford Ranch was one of the best-run operations in the territory. In May, Rosalie started feeling sick in the mornings. At first, she thought it was something she ate or perhaps a stomach ailment. But when the sickness persisted for 2 weeks, Susan Sullivan pulled her aside during a trip to town and gently suggested another possibility. Rosalie came home that day in a daze. She found Decker in the barn, working on a saddle that needed repair, and just stood there watching him for a long moment. He looked up and immediately set down his tools, concern crossing his face. "What is wrong? Are you all right?" "I am pregnant." The words hung in the air between them. Decker's expression went from concern to shock to pure, unfiltered joy in the space of a heartbeat. "You are sure?" "As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor." Susan said the signs are unmistakable. "Morning sickness, fatigue, the fact that my monthly courses have stopped." She paused, suddenly uncertain. "Are you happy about this? We did not really talk about children." Decker crossed to her in 3 long strides and pulled her into his arms. "Happy, Rosalie, I am beyond happy, I am thrilled." "Terrified but thrilled," she laughed, relief flooding through her. "Terrified is a good word for it. I have no idea how to be a mother. And I have no idea how to be a father, but we will figure it out together just like everything else." They told the cowboys that evening, and the men celebrated with the enthusiasm of prospective uncles. Miguel proclaimed that he would teach the child to ride, and Frank insisted he would teach them to rope. It was overwhelming and wonderful, and Rosalie felt tears prick her eyes at the outpouring of support. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though it did complicate ranch work. By her 5th month, Rosalie could no longer sit a horse comfortably for long periods, which frustrated her to no end. She was not used to being limited by her body, and she chafed at the restrictions. Decker tried to be supportive while also being protective, a balancing act that resulted in more than one argument. "I am pregnant, not helpless," she snapped one afternoon when he suggested she stay home instead of riding out to check the north pasture. "I know that, but you are also carrying our child, and I would rather you be careful." "I am being careful. I am just not going to sit in the house like an invalid for 5 more months. I will go mad." They compromised as they had learned to do over the months. She could still ride and work, but she would take one of the younger, gentler horses and would not go out alone. It was not perfect, but it was workable, and it allowed Rosalie to maintain her sense of independence while easing Decker's worry. In October, as the weather began to cool again, Susan Sullivan came to stay at the ranch. She had experience with childbirth, both as a mother and as someone who had helped with several difficult deliveries, and Rosalie wanted her there when her time came. The doctor in Old Tucson was competent but not always available, and Rosalie trusted Susan more than she trusted most medical professionals. The baby arrived on a crisp November morning, just as the sun was rising over the eastern hills. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the dawn, but Rosalie faced it with the same determined courage she brought to everything else. Decker stayed with her the whole time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, whispering encouragement when she thought she could not go on. Finally, as golden light filled the bedroom, their son was born. He came into the world screaming his displeasure, small and red-faced and absolutely perfect. Susan cleaned him quickly and placed him in Rosalie's arms, and Decker felt his throat tighten with emotion as he watched his wife cradle their child. "He is beautiful," Rosalie whispered, tears streaming down her exhausted face. "He is perfect." "He is ours," Decker said, reaching out to touch the baby's tiny hand. The infant gripped his finger with surprising strength, and Decker felt something shift fundamentally in his chest. This was his son, his family, the future he had never let himself imagine. They named him Peter, after Pete Garrison, and the Cowboys took turns visiting throughout the day to meet the newest member of the Crawford ranch. Miguel held the baby with surprising gentleness, and Frank declared that Peter would be the best cowboy Arizona had ever seen. It was chaotic and loud and exactly right. The first few months of parenthood were exhausting. Peter was a colicky baby who seemed to prefer crying to sleeping, and both Decker and Rosalie spent many nights walking the floor with him, trying anything to soothe his distress. But there were moments of profound beauty too. The first time Peter smiled at them, a genuine smile and not just gas. The way he would calm instantly when Rosalie sang to him, her voice soft and slightly off-key but filled with love. The way he would grab Decker's finger and hold on like he never wanted to let go. By spring, Peter had settled into a more predictable routine, and Rosalie was champing at the bit to get back to full ranch work. They hired a woman from town, a widow named Martha who needed work, to help with the house and watch Peter during the day. This allowed Rosalie to return to managing the Cowboys and the daily operations, though she made sure to take breaks to nurse the baby and spend time with him. "I do not know how you did it," Decker said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. Peter was asleep in a cradle at Rosalie's feet, his small fists clenched even in sleep. "Managing the ranch and being a mother, it is incredible. I have help. Martha, you, the Cowboys. It takes a village, as they say." She paused, then added, And honestly, being able to do both makes me happy. I love Peter more than anything, but I also love the work. I love the ranch and the animals and the challenge of it all. I do not want to give that up just because I am a mother." "You should never have to," Decker said firmly. "We built this life together, and we will raise our son together. You do not have to choose between being a mother and being a rancher. You can be both." She leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned from gold to pink to purple. Decker thought about how much his life had changed in the past 2 years. He had gone from a lonely bachelor running a ranch by himself to a husband and father with a partner who made him better in every way. It was more than he had ever thought to ask for, more than he had dreamed possible. The years that followed brought both challenges and triumphs. Droughts tested their water management skills. A particularly harsh winter in 1886 claimed some livestock and pushed the ranch finances to the edge, but they weathered it through careful planning and hard work. Through it all, Decker and Rosalie worked as a seamless team, their strengths complementing each other perfectly. Peter grew into a lively, curious boy who was equally at home on horseback or playing in the dirt. By the time he was 4, he was riding on his own, a small figure on a patient pony, following his mother or father around the ranch with determination. He had Rosalie's auburn hair and Decker's dark eyes, and he had inherited a stubborn streak from both of them that promised interesting teenage years ahead. In 1888, Rosalie discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because she knew what to expect or perhaps because this baby was simply more agreeable. Their daughter, Sarah, was born in the spring of 1889, a calm, sweet-tempered child who seemed content to watch the world with wide gray eyes. With 2 children and a growing ranch, life was busy but rich with meaning. Decker and Rosalie had long since proven that their partnership worked, both professionally and personally. The ranch was now one of the most successful in the territory, known for quality cattle and fair dealings. They had expanded their holdings, buying adjacent land when it became available, and they employed a dozen cowboys year-round with additional hands during busy seasons. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Decker surprised Rosalie by taking her on a trip to San Francisco. It was the first time either of them had been to a real city, and they spent a week exploring, eating in restaurants, seeing theater productions, and reveling in the novelty of being away from the responsibilities of the ranch. But by the end of the week, both of them were ready to go home. "I miss the quiet," Rosalie confessed as they rode the train back to Arizona. "And the sky. You cannot see the stars in the city the way you can at the ranch." "I miss the kids," Decker admitted. "And the land. As much fun as this has been, I am ready to be home." They arrived back at the ranch to find everything running smoothly under Miguel's supervision. Peter and Sarah, who had been staying with Susan Sullivan in town, were thrilled to see their parents and talked over each other in their eagerness to share everything that had happened while they were gone. That night, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet, Decker and Rosalie sat on the porch as they had so many times before. The stars were brilliant overhead, the air smelled of sage and dust, and somewhere in the distance, a cow lowed softly. "You ever regret it?" Decker asked suddenly. "This life, it is hard work, isolation, endless challenges. Do you ever wish you had chosen something easier?" Rosalie was quiet for a moment, considering. Then she reached over and took his hand. "Not for a single second. This life, this ranch, our children, this is everything I ever wanted, even when I did not know I wanted it. You gave me a home, Decker. Not just a place to live, but a real home. A place where I belong, where I am valued for who I am, not who someone thinks I should be. I could never regret that. "I am glad you stayed," Decker said quietly. "That day I came home and found you running the ranch, I had no idea how much my life was about to change. You changed everything, Rosalie. Made it all better, made it all mean something." "We changed it together," she corrected gently. "That is what makes it work." He pulled her close and kissed her, tasting coffee and the sweetness that was uniquely hers. When they broke apart, both smiling, he said, "Here is to another 10 years. "Another 50, she countered. "Deal." The years continued to pass, marked by the rhythms of ranch life. Calving seasons and brandings, cattle drives and horse breaking, droughts and good years, children growing and cowboys aging. Peter developed into a fine horseman and showed a gift for understanding animals that rivaled his mother's. Sarah was quieter, more studious, but she had a head for numbers that made her invaluable when it came to managing the ranch finances. In 1895, when Peter was 16 and Sarah was 6, Decker and Rosalie learned they were expecting again. It was a surprise, both of them having assumed their family was complete. But surprises were not always unwelcome, and they prepared to welcome another child. Their son, Thomas, was born in early 1896, a healthy baby who seemed determined to make his presence known from the start. Peter was old enough to be helpful, and Sarah was thrilled to have a baby brother to dote on. The house was full and chaotic and wonderful. By the turn of the century, the Crawford Ranch was firmly established as one of the premier operations in Arizona. Decker was in his early 50s, his dark hair now streaked with silver, but still strong and capable. Rosalie was in her mid-40s, her auburn hair faded but her spirit as fierce as ever. They had built something lasting, something that would continue beyond them. Peter had officially taken over much of the day-to-day management of the ranch, working alongside his mother with the same easy partnership Decker and Rosalie had always shared. Sarah was attending a teaching college in Tucson, planning to return and start a school in Old Tucson. Thomas, at 4 years old, was already showing signs of being as stubborn and independent as both his parents. One evening in the summer of 1900, Decker and Rosalie rode out to the hill where Pete Garrison was buried. They did this occasionally, taking time away from the bustle of the ranch to remember where they had come from and to reflect on how far they had traveled together. "You think he would be proud?" Rosalie asked, looking at the simple marker that bore her uncle's name. "Of what we built here?" "I know he would be," Decker said with certainty. "You honored his memory, Rosalie. You took what he taught you and built something even bigger and better. That is the best legacy anyone could ask for." They stood in silence for a while, holding hands and watching the sun set behind the mountains. The light turned the landscape golden, highlighting every rock and cactus and scrub brush, making the harsh land look beautiful and almost gentle. "I love you," Rosalie said suddenly. "I do not say it enough, but I do. You are my best friend, my partner, the love of my life. I cannot imagine any of this without you." Decker turned to her, seeing the woman he had fallen in love with 18 years ago. The woman who had saved his ranch and stolen his heart. The woman who had given him a family and a purpose beyond just surviving. "I love you too. More than I can ever properly express. You are my everything, Rosalie. Always have been, always will be." They kissed as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of red and orange. It was a moment of perfect peace, a moment that captured everything they had built together, a life forged in the harsh beauty of the Arizona frontier, tempered by love and hard work and unwavering partnership. Years later, when they were old and gray and their children had children of their own, people would ask them about the secret to their long marriage. Decker would always look at Rosalie and smile, and she would smile back, and they would say the same thing. They had been partners first, equals who respected each other's strengths and supported each other through weaknesses. They had worked side by side, building not just a ranch but a life. They had faced challenges together and celebrated triumphs together. They had loved each other not in spite of who they were, but because of it. And that, they would say, made all the difference. As they rode back to the ranch that evening, the first stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky, Rosalie looked over at her husband and felt a wave of gratitude so profound it almost hurt. She had been so afraid, all those years ago. Afraid of wanting something and losing it, afraid of not being enough, afraid of the vulnerability that came with love. But Decker had been patient, had waited for her to be ready, and had given her something she had never truly had before, a place where she belonged completely. The ranch house came into view, lights glowing warm in the windows. She could see Peter moving around in the barn doing final checks on the horses for the night. Smoke rose from the chimney, meaning Martha was cooking dinner. It was home, in the truest sense of the word, and it was theirs. "Race you back," Decker said suddenly, his eyes glinting with mischief. "You are on," Rosalie laughed, and they urged their horses into a gallop, racing across the darkening land like they were young again, like they had all the time in the world. They reached the barn neck and neck, both laughing and breathless. Peter looked up from his work and shook his head in amusement. "You two are going to break your necks one of these days." "Your mother started it," Decker said, dismounting. "I did not. You challenged me. Details." They were still arguing good-naturedly as they took care of the horses, working together with the ease of long practice. Peter watched them with affection, hoping that someday he would find a partnership like his parents had, a love that could weather anything and still come out laughing. That night, after dinner and after the children were all settled, Decker and Rosalie lay in bed together, her head on his chest, his arms around her. This had become their ritual, this quiet time at the end of each day when they could simply be together without the demands of the ranch or family pulling them in different directions. "You remember the first time we met?" Rosalie asked drowsily. "You looked so shocked to find me there." "I thought I was hallucinating from exhaustion, a beautiful woman running my ranch better than I could. It seemed too good to be true. I was terrified you would throw me out. I was terrified you would leave." She lifted her head to look at him. "I am glad I stayed. So am I. Best decision I ever made, offering you that job. Best decision I ever made, taking it." He kissed her forehead, then her nose, then her lips. "I love you, Rosalie Crawford. Thank you for saving my ranch and my life. Thank you for giving me both," she whispered back. They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, secure in the knowledge that whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them together. That was the promise they had made to each other all those years ago, and it was a promise they had kept every single day since. Outside, the stars wheeled slowly overhead, and the land stretched away in all directions, beautiful and harsh and unforgiving. But here, in this house on this ranch, two people had built something that transcended the difficulty of frontier life. They had built love and partnership and family. They had built a legacy. And it all started the day a dusty rancher came home from a long journey and found a strange woman running his cowboys better than he ever could. It was the beginning of everything, the moment when two lives collided and merged and became something greater than either could have been alone. In the years that followed, the Crawford ranch continued to thrive. Peter eventually married a woman from Tucson, a teacher named Elizabeth who shared his love of the land and brought her own skills to the ranch. They gave Decker and Rosalie 5 grandchildren who filled the house with noise and laughter. Sarah married a lawyer and split her time between practicing law in Tucson and helping manage the business aspects of the ranch. Thomas, true to form, struck out on his own, establishing a horse breeding operation that became renowned throughout the territory. Decker and Rosalie gradually stepped back from the day-to-day operations, trusting their children to carry on what they had built. But they never truly retired. They could still be found most mornings riding out to check on cattle or inspect fences, their horses walking side by side just as they had for decades. They were fixtures at community gatherings, respected elders who had seen Arizona transform from wild frontier to something approaching civilization. On their 40th wedding anniversary, in 1923, the family threw them a celebration that brought together cowboys past and present, neighbors from miles around, and friends from throughout the state. Miguel, now in his 80s and retired but still living in a small house on the ranch property, gave a toast that had everyone laughing and crying. "I knew from the first day that Miss Rosalie arrived that she was special," he said, his voice still strong despite his age. "And I knew the boss was a goner the moment he laid eyes on her. It took them a while to figure it out, but once they did, there was no stopping them. They built something here that goes beyond cattle and land. They built a family, a community, a legacy of hard work and fair dealing. And they did it together, as partners in every sense of the word. To Decker and Rosalie, may you have many more years together." Everyone raised their glasses, and Decker looked at Rosalie, seeing the woman he had loved for 40 years. She was in her 60s now, her hair completely white, her face lined with the evidence of a life fully lived. But when she smiled at him, he saw the fierce young woman who had stood in his corral giving orders to rough cowboys, who had delivered babies and saved ranches, who had loved him even when she was afraid of love. "Thank you," he said softly, just to her, "for everything. For saying yes that day in the barn, for staying, for building this life with me. I would do it all again in a heartbeat." "So would I," she said, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Every hard moment, every challenge, every triumph, all of it as long as it was with you." They danced that night, moving slowly to music played by their grandchildren and hired musicians, surrounded by everyone they loved. It was a perfect moment, a culmination of decades of love and work and partnership. Decker Crawford lived to be 78 years old, passing peacefully in his sleep in 1928 with Rosalie beside him. His last words to her were, "I will wait for you, however long it takes." Rosalie lived another 5 years, continuing to advise her children and grandchildren on ranch matters, still riding out occasionally to see the land she loved. She passed away in 1933, also in her sleep, in the bedroom she had shared with Decker for so many years. They were buried side by side on the hill next to Pete Garrison, overlooking the ranch they had built together. The marker bore simple words: Decker Crawford, 1850 to 1928, and Rosalie Crawford, 1857 to 1933, partners in life, love, and ranching, together forever. The Crawford Ranch continued for generations, passed down through Peter's line, a testament to what two people could build when they worked together with love and respect and unwavering commitment. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun set behind the mountains and painted the sky in brilliant colors, people swore they could see two figures on horseback, riding side by side across the land they had made their own, still together after all these years, still partners in every way that mattered. It was a love story forged in the harsh beauty of the Old West, a story of finding home in a person rather than a place, of building something lasting through hard work and faith and partnership. It was the story of a rancher who came home to find a strange woman running his cowboys, and it was the story of a woman who found the courage to love despite her fears. But most of all, It was the story of two people who chose each other, every day, for the rest of their lives. And that choice, made over and over through decades of laughter and tears, challenges and triumphs, was the foundation of everything they built together.